Shannon Flynn weighs in on an important conversation. If Mark Hofmann were ever released from jail, would he kill again? I think all of us would like to know the answer to that question. Please check out our conversation. But before you do that, one thing I just wanted to mention was to please, when you're in iTunes, please give us a review. That'll help more people to find us. Or if you're in Stitcher, give us a review there too. I would really appreciate your help. Thanks a lot. Now back to our conversation. So he was, for being a murderer, he was a pretty smart guy too.
Well, had he not done all those forgeries, I don't, and this is my personal opinion. People have asked me, well, do you think he would ever murder anybody again? And I believe yes and no. My own thought of it. I believe no, because he is not naturally that way. I mean, he sort of is now. But I believe yes, because someone told me this, and I hope that it's true, that oftentimes when a bear hurts or kills somebody, in Yellowstone Park, something like that, they have to put the bear down, because they say that once that bear gets the taste of blood in his mouth, he'll do it again and again and again. Well, I think that's Mark. He's done it once. And if he did not have a motivation to do it, I don't believe he would. He wouldn't go out and just kind of shoot somebody for no reason. But I believe he has the taste of that blood in his mouth. And so if he got himself into another situation where he was up a creek and didn't know what to do and was about again to be exposed, I mean, that's the reason he killed Stephen Christensen. He needed to put off, well, I don't know if I'll just go through this one. He had the Oath of a Free Man for sale in New York to the Library of Congress for $1.5 million. He had already sold off, unbeknownst to most people, almost anybody, he had already sold off part interest of that to other people for cash. He was supposed to go to New York on Friday of that week to sell off his last part interest in that oath.
The week of the bombing? The
week of the bombing.
Oh.
Now, he had gotten pressed and he had to come up with that McClellan collection. And before that, he had been able to just put people off. I'll do it next week, I'll do it tomorrow. He was the king of that. Well, Stephen Christensen, and mainly because of that loan at First Interstate Bank, was not going to be put off. No, Mark, you can't tell me I'll do it in a week or something. We've got to go. And he said it was in a safe deposit box. And so they had to go to the bank when the bank was open. So that was a Monday. That was Columbus. No, it was the weekend. They couldn't go on Monday because that was a banking holiday. So they were supposed to go Tuesday. So Mark planted that bomb so that Steve would get that in the morning, and then he wouldn't have to go with Steve to the safety deposit box, in which was nothing. There was nothing in there. And that loomed so large in his view that he would literally do anything to get out of it. And I think an illustration here is appropriate. If you've been to seminary or stuff, often they'll do a little object lesson where they put a piece of string around your fingers, a piece of thread, and you break it, and that's easy, and then it gets harder and harder, and then pretty soon there's so many you can't do it. Well, that's why you shouldn't commit, sins, because, ones, and then you can't break it. That's not really, to me, a very valid illustration. The real illustration is where teenage kids all the time will wrap a piece of thread around their finger till it goes numb. And that's kind of funny, and see, it's numb, and it's starting to kind of turn red and blue, but then after a little bit, it starts to really hurt, and man, that thing comes off. Well, that's what Mark did, is he wrapped that around. All of the lies, all of the forgeries, all of the promises, he just kept strapping that thing around and around and around, till that thing hurt so bad, he would do anything to get it off, including killing somebody. And so what was not, not really his nature, he wasn't a murderous person. That hurt so bad, he'd do anything to get it off. And so he thought that if Stephen Christensen, and he didn't need to be killed, just needed to be injured sufficiently that Now he put packed nails in there and all that. So I know there's some like, well, he meant to kill him. I'm not talking about that, but it didn't need to be killed. He just needed to get some time. Because had he been able to get to New York on Friday, he could have come back with enough money to pay back that $185,000. Pressure would have been off. Steve showed up on his door, was going to show up on his door on Tuesday, and let's go. Well, then he was in real trouble because Hugh Pinnock had called him on Tuesday and said, well, the meeting's still on, we'll do it tomorrow. Mark was up, and that's the reason he was parked where he was. That wasn't just a random place to park. It was right down the street from the McCune mansion. And the attorney representing the guy that was going to purchase that McClellan collection, pay off the loan, his office was in the McCune mansion. And so Mark was right down to the last hour, minute, and second. He couldn't get out of it anymore. He was going to have to go up that road and say, I don't have it. Which he believed at that point the whole thing would unravel, and very well may have. Now the bizarre part is, and again, just think about this the way you want to think about it. Why in the world didn't he just say, I forged this stuff? Oh, he would have been prosecuted. He would have gone to prison for, I don't know what, 3, 4 years, 5 years. He'd be out now and maybe getting paid to detect forgeries. What is it in his head that turned? I don't know. I don't know if he knows. Maybe he does.
So that third bomb, the one that injured him. So one of the things that I heard, the differences were one with that killed Steve Christensen had nails.
That's correct.
The one that killed Kathy Sheets had nails. The one that injured him did not have nails.
Kathy Sheets did not have nails.
Oh, Kathy didn't have nails either?
Did not have nails.
Okay.
Only the first one.
Only the first one. So some people have speculated that he injured himself on purpose. Now, this is a new thing. I'm trying to remember. Kurt thought that it was meant for somebody else. I hadn't heard about this lawyer at the McCune mansion.
Yeah, no. People have said that. Oh, I think it was meant for me. If you just think about that, that simply couldn't be true. Because who in Salt Lake City on October 16th or 17th of 1985 would see Mark Hofmann and he would say, here's this package. Will you hold it for me? And nobody was picking up packages. UPS had pretty well shut down because nobody was picking up packages. The way he made those things work, and it's important to understand this, the way he made those things work is there was a battery on a rocket motor thing, for ignition in a pipe bomb. But it was on a mercury switch. And he had a little safety device in there so that just before he set it down, he pulled that safety out. But what he did is he wrote the address on the package and then put it face down. And so then when you saw the package, what is the natural thing everybody's going to do? Get it and turn it over, see who it's to. That trip the mercury switch, off it goes. Well, that's important because the third bomb was made in the same way. Now, here's what's impossible to know. Did he really gonna plant that? Another person? Or I don't know. At that point, he may have been so irrational that that's possible. But what in fact happened was he parked that car and I believe sat there for a period of time, I don't know, and thought, I am caught. I am caught. What do I do? He got out of the car, that bomb package was sitting on the driver's seat, and he made the decision to flip it over.
So you think he did it on purpose to injure himself?
Now, if he believed that he could have survived that, the car did burn, but there was enough papers and stuff in the trunk that had it burned completely, which it didn't, which cars don't, that only happens in the movies, he could have said, yes, McClellan collection right there. And who could have proved him wrong?
Right.
He could have come up with some crazy story about who put that bomb there, that he was really going up the office and then he forgot something, came back, flipped the package over. So Does he regret what he did? No. And was he suicidal as I'm trying to repent of this? I don't think so. I think his hand is in the cookie jar and he's thinking still, how can I get out of this? How can I get out of this? Flip the package.
Well, if he flipped the package, then why is he going to make up this story about a brown van that hit him?
I think he was just telling people stuff.
You don't think he was just dazed from the explosion and was just like, I don't know what happened?
I don't know. You know, afterwards, he told different stories to different people. And so I don't know. It's very confused. Was he telling one set of people it was the tan van, or was he telling other people that, that there was a package on the seat? I don't know.
Well, and then you mentioned this McEwen mansion. There was a lawyer that was going to buy it for the church?
No, for a guy named David Christensen, who at the time was mission president of the Canada Halifax mission.
And so because you said
I know this is okay. So I got to tell the truth here. Sorry. This is what happened. The church still wanted that collection badly, but they needed to figure out a way for them to take possession of that without officially taking possession of it. And I don't know who knew David Christensen, but he was very well-to-do, and somebody knew him well enough that they could make a phone call to him and say, look, there is this group of papers that we potentially would really like to have, but we are not in a position to make the purchase directly. So we need somebody to act as an intermediary. Would you do it?
Would you buy them?
Would you buy them? And then maybe in the future give them to us. But please know, or at least this is the way Dallin Oaks couched it, please know that we're not officially asking you, and we're making no warranty as to size, content, or authenticity, and we're going to just rely upon your generous spirit to give it in the future, maybe. Just know all of that. I don't know how those conversations really went. But the point was, even though Stephen Christensen had been put out of the picture, Mark believed that he now had, at least a week. Breathing room didn't last one day. Now, I don't know who representing the church was going to be there at that meeting with the attorney. It may have been Hugh Pinnock.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I've been reading Richard Turley's book, but it's been a while. I believe it was Hinckley, Oaks, Pinnock.
Those were the three that dealt with Mark on whatever a routine basis.
Right. Yeah, so I would assume those. I'm trying to remember who was the church historian. Was it Durham?
Well, G. Homer, no. I can't remember who it was at the time. It may have been G. Homer Durham.
Yeah, I think that was.
But Mark never really ever dealt with him. Don Schmidt was the guy that, the Mark worked with.
Okay.
Basically.
Yeah, and I'm sure Pinnock would have been there because he was the go-between with the bank and the bad loan.
Well,
so
he
I'm
had
sure
a
he was
very serious invested interest in making sure that check was written, made to Mark, and that Mark did do nothing other than go immediately to First Interstate right down the street and endorse that check and pass it over. Because that's exactly the role that Stephen Christensen was playing there. He was he wasn't a document expert or anything like that. He had enough of a relationship with Mark that he could call Mark at home and go over to his house at 10 at night and knock on the door and get him to answer, and so that is the role that he would have played. And so what I believed everyone assumed was that even though Stephen Christensen's now killed, the next day Mark is still going to go to the bank, empty that safe deposit box, and take it up to that office. But of course Mark didn't have it. He had a few. Now, he did have some pieces. He did actually have some papyrus. He did actually have some papyrus. So there could have been some pieces there, and that papyrus was actually in the trunk, and it was encased in some plastic, some Lexan, very nicely, because I did it. I put it in that plastic.
Where did you get the papyrus from?
Mark had purchased that about 6 months beforehand, and he had been showing that to people as evidence that there is a McClellan collection and there's real stuff. And it was real papyrus, not matching what the church owned, because it was from a different time period, and but it was very real papyrus.
Okay.
He bought it from Kenneth Rendell.
Oh, wow. And you mounted it in the plastic. Wow.
Now,
and that was in the trunk.
That meant that the forgeries were going to become, sooner or later they were going to come out. Because if he had passed that over to Steve Christensen, it was Kenneth Rendell that did the authentication of the Martin Harris letter. Who do you believe Steve Christensen would have gone to for an authentication of the McClellan collection? Kenneth Rendell. Included in that is papyrus. And Kenneth Rendell said, "Oh, that's real papyrus. I sold that to Mark Hofmann about 6 months ago." What? Again, the whole thing's exposed. The whole thing's exposed.
So, okay. Now, there was one other thing. There's no relationship between Dave Christensen and Steve Christensen. They're not related at all.
No.
But
unfortunate name, but...
So do you think that third bomb may have been intended for Dave Christensen? Or you're...
Well, no. He was in Halifax, Canada at the time.
Oh, okay.
So that's another reason... I don't know, but and then part of the reason I don't know is, again, with our perspective, we look back and are looking for rationality and consistency. There was no rationality and consistency at the time. In fact, Mark was selling some forgeries in the month or so before the bombings, the 2 weeks. One of them was quite good, and two of them were really bad. I mean, they could have been detected in a second. But I think it just illustrates that he is not thinking really rationally. So we want to look back and say, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, yeah, it doesn't make sense, some of the stuff that he was doing. But I think he was kind of out of his mind. I mean, he was doing stupid things, and not all the time, but he would do stupid things in the middle of that. And so some of that stuff, I mean, we look back on it and say, oh, we can see how that all played out, or maybe would play out. Mark couldn't see that. All he could see was the pressures that were coming on him very intensely, and he was just putting out fires any way he could. I mean, to think about the oath of a free man, to sell off the last piece of interest you have in that, it's stupid, except he is putting out a fire with that money. So anyway, everything that was done, but anyway, to get back to that third bomb, I don't know if there was a rational reason for that. I just use all those examples that there doesn't need to be a rational reason for it to have happened, because there was lots of irrational things. So who was that intended for? No idea. And maybe he didn't know who it was intended for until that day.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Shannon Flynn. Mark Hofmann doesn't have very many visitors, but Shannon Flynn tells us about some of the visits that he made, as well as a very surprising visitor.
But I did find out that Gary Sheets went one time. And I mean, you'll be able to show that, the correspondence for that. But I have no idea what was said.
Click here to subscribe, click here for a transcript, and over here you'll see some other videos that we've done here on YouTube. We hope you'll use this as a valuable resource to learn more about Mormon history.